Thank you for tuning in. My name is Ib Green. I'm a distinguished engineer here at Foursquare. I'm focusing on building tools for analysis and visualization of geospatial data, and I'll be your moderator for today. Today we are joined by University of Pennsylvania postdoc Jorge Barreras to discuss his current research on epidemic modeling and how he is using Foursquare's location data to help solve for a real-life problem. Jorge and I will cover various topics, including details about his research, what made him choose this topic, how location data and technology made a difference in how he conducted his research, and the trends he's seeing in the market, and more. Jorge, welcome. Can you please tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Thanks, Ib. Thank you for having me here. Like you said, I'm a postdoc at the University of Pennsylvania, where I also did my PhD. So I've been here for the past 6 years. I'm a mathematician by training, and I'm Colombian. And I started working with Foursquare data about a year ago for my topic, which is epidemiology, epidemic modeling.
Thank you, Jorge, for the introduction. Now you can perhaps tell us about your research in epidemic modeling.
Right. So I would say the work we're doing could be described as data-driven network epidemic modeling. I'll be over-assumptuous here and say that the goal of most of us doing epidemic modeling is to be able to model and understand epidemics so we can come up with an optimal intervention that will save human lives and that will alleviate the burden to the economy. And the way we're trying to innovate here is, for the first time, now that we have access to these very granular, high-quality location data sets, to be able to inject to these models the evidence of how people are moving and coming in contact with one another, to incorporate this very important ingredient, which is an epidemic network, which has always been theoretical, or some theoretical assumption of how people are in contact in a community. But now, for the first time, we're able to actually observe this and integrate it into the models.
That's wonderful. What led you to pick this topic?
Well, for the first years of my PhD, I was working on more theoretical things involving graph theory and spectrograph theory. And I decided that I wanted to work on a meaningful application that could move the needle and make a difference. So something that was in the intersection of network science and graph theory and things to do with data and meaningful applications was epidemic modeling. I chose this topic 1 month before COVID hit, which was just, I guess, great timing and also bad timing.
Thanks, Jorge. Now I'd love to learn a bit more how you got in contact with Foursquare and our data. What did you know about Foursquare prior to this effort, and how did you come to learn about our location data technology?
Definitely. So my first contact with Foursquare was probably 8 or 9 years ago as a student in my home university, where my friends and I would use Foursquare to share, the cool cafes or restaurants that we found. We would share this over social media, and it was very popular. It perhaps was the first app I remember that people would use to signal where they were and to express interest in a location. The second time was over the course of my PhD, when I was trying to learn more about location data sets. And in this universe of third-party location data sets that were out there and were made available during the response to COVID-19, I remembered Foursquare, and it stood out that Foursquare actually has a ground truth data set in which, over the years, users would provide feedback of exactly where they were in the form of check-ins. So this caught our eye because it's very important to have ground truth to be able to calibrate your models and to be able to be confident in saying that individuals are indeed physically present in a location. So in comparison to providers that don't have that, they're kind of, let's call it, they're doing a best guess of where individuals are, but companies that have this positive feedback will be able to actually train a model.
Are there other aspects of Foursquare's location data and technology that make a difference in how you can conduct your research, and any areas that are particularly helpful or add value to what you do?
So I already mentioned the value of having ground truth in the visitation estimates provided by Foursquare. Another big element is the places data set. So the data set of locations covered by Foursquare is very comprehensive and is very useful compared to the alternatives out there, which we can use to get a bigger, more complete picture of where individuals might be coming in contact with one another. A super crucial aspect is that the visitation data provided by Foursquare has a normalization score that tells you how much weight should one observed visit should count for, which is very important because we know that data of this type could have some intrinsic biases that you need to correct. Third-party data sets that don't have any demographic information, like Foursquare does, provide no tools to correct for these biases, and we know that that can greatly affect the results. Finally, we are aware that many of the third-party data sets out there have a big sparsity problem. So you might say you have millions of users, but for a lot of users, you only have activity for a few hours in a week. A distinct feature of Foursquare's data is that the data is collected with always on location services, which means we have great coverage and a complete picture also for each individual of the locations they have visited. And this is crucial for our applications.
Thank you. It's great to hear that all the work we're putting into our location data is having an impact on our users. In your research, you have mentioned how network models don't always account for the heterogeneity of mobility patterns. So, maybe you can speak to the benefits of having more granularity in the data, for instance, age and income and so on.
That's a great point. One of the efforts we're making to improve this pipeline of data-driven epidemic modeling has to do with that ingredient, which is the epidemic network. So to better understand this, it's important to have the context that before COVID-19, it was extremely common to simply assume that in a given city, everyone was in contact with everyone else with the same probability. That is an assumption of homogeneity. We know from theory and from observations that this assumption is just not realistic and not good, and it leads to it forces some conclusions that are not necessarily true. I'll give you an example. There was a very famous model by the Imperial College of London where they made one such assumption of homogeneity. These types of models can only have one of two outcomes. Either the epidemic dies early on, or it continues to grow and it infects a very large percentage of the population, has a single peak, and then decays into herd immunity. If that is the only conclusion you can get, then all of your efforts need to go towards flattening the curve, and you'll be forced to implement very restrictive lockdowns. In reality, once you use a network for your model that has more complex patterns instead of all of these complete links, then you'll find that your epidemic has multiple peaks and multiple chances to die out. It will be more like your epidemic discovers a pocket of susceptibles, and then you have a local peak of infection, and then that might die out, or it could discover another pocket of susceptibles. Now, we've known this for a while, but we've never had the data to replace those theoretical homogeneous networks with something that's real and filled with this complexity and that changes over time. So mobility data like the one provided by Foursquare finally lets us fill in that gap and provide real networks which are not homogeneous, and that really alters the conclusion and the findings you get.
Thank you. Yes, it's no surprise to us here at Foursquare that the quality of data is extremely important, and it's good to hear that it can make a real difference to the analysis. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about data quality in your research and what impact and considerations you have around that.
Of course. So one thing that is very important about epidemic modeling research in the past few years is that we were simultaneously experimenting with a novel and very promising type of data that we weren't using to this extent before. But also it was directly influencing public policy, which means that the stakes were really high. And we didn't get the chance of going through this sort of extensive phase of research where we take these data sets, we validate them against several benchmarks, we test for different biases, and we evaluate them, over several rounds of independent validation. This can be problematic because now that those research papers are out and we have seen these conclusions, we are now aware that there are many biases and problems in the data. To make it concrete with just one example, if your data is sparse and you want to answer a simple question like whether a non-pharmaceutical intervention like a lockdown was effective, perhaps you want to take a sample and an epidemic model and see what's happening before and then see what's happening after. And then you measure the effect and you make some conclusions. We noticed that in many data sets that were incomplete, the composition of the panel of people before the intervention was very different, substantially different than the composition of the panel afterwards. This sort of compositional effect will completely compromise your conclusions. And it is a feature that has to do with data quality, which you need to address. And in many cases, it was not. So, more research where we highlight these shortcomings of the data and we find promising solutions is really critically needed.
Are there any challenges that you are facing while working through your research? And if so, how are you trying to overcome them?
So, of course, as a researcher and as a PhD student, there are the familiar challenges of, venturing into this area that was not my initial area of expertise, where to analyze these types of data sets, you need a certain set of skills to analyze geospatial data. You need computational resources. So you need someone to fund these computational resources, maybe through cloud computing. You need tools to handle large, massive data sets in general. But one of the things that we identified as a big obstacle, probably for the field as a whole, is access to the data. And to the infrastructure in general. For a researcher like myself, to be able to compare multiple data sets and validate one of these results, you truly need several rounds of negotiations with different data providers in which you have to sign agreements for data sharing, data preparation, all of this, which goes beyond the scope of a single researcher. We've identified that this might make it difficult for smaller institutions that don't have access to a legal team, to a dedicated negotiator, which makes it difficult to work with most providers, which is where some data providers that take collaboration with academia very seriously and even take the initiative to reach out are massively valuable. So if there's anything that we struggled the most was with finding willingness and ease of access to these data sets. And at that point, Foursquare was truly a good actor, a good element. Things were much easier than with other providers.
I'd love to hear your perspective on what you're seeing in the market for location and location data?
So I obviously can only speak in depth about what's happening in epidemiology. I know that most research endeavors in epidemic modeling are probably gonna start integrating this data moving forward. Like the era in which it was okay to put out a paper in which your mobility data had a very coarse granularity, or your model was use airline data. I think that's a thing of the past, and this will be the most valuable resource in epidemic modeling and moving forward. From our interactions with providers, we also know that this is not unique to epidemiology. All types of businesses and research agendas are trying to integrate this data at a massive scale. So we're seeing integration across many companies, many research groups, many topics. And one thing that has come up, which is very important and sensitive, is the issue of privacy. So we are seeing how some of the big, more responsible actors take privacy very seriously and try to self-regulate by taking measures to protect user privacy from end to end, like removing any foot traffic data or visitation data to sensitive POIs, allowing all users to opt out and requiring that they consent to sharing their data. These are all very important elements that need to be incorporated in all of these applications.
Yes, and thank you for calling that out, Jorge. When we work with consumer data, we obviously here at Foursquare take on a tremendous responsibility, and we recognize this, and privacy has always been at the core of how we work. You know, consumer protections are really the main criteria for our solutions, and we see this as part of our company culture and DNA. So we believe that we'll be able to continue to deliver these type of data sets in a responsible way for a long time. To summarize for the audience what we've heard, it's the benefits of access to high quality location data, and also a kind of almost a little revolution that it is bringing to academic research such as your own. Also, I think we've had a good emphasis on the value that comes through companies such as Foursquare taking a collaboration with academia seriously to enable this important research, but also learn from the deep understanding of the data, so that we can continue to refine our data and continue to provide data of the highest quality for analytics.
And if I could add to that, I would love to say to other researchers in epidemic modeling, just really highlight how important this resource is. Like, it is true that this is a game changer. It's not only like an interesting addition into the mix, but it's providing something that we had been missing for so long to truly make epidemic modeling data-driven. So it's taking epidemiology to a new age. I hope that's not too bold of a statement. And I think the most valuable next steps are happening now. We need this blueprint on how to use this data integrated so that we can produce these accurate, useful models that we all saw how much we needed. So I would encourage researchers to integrate this data and help us build this infrastructure, this blueprint on how to use it.
Thank you, Jorge. Those are great points, and I can't wait to see the research that will come out now that we have both, you know, wide access to Foursquare data to academics, and also the blueprint that you've drawn here available to those researchers. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.